Oh, good morning. I love that. I miss that so much. I really did. It's nice, to know someone's name is a special thing. So, is everyone enjoying the heat? I love the heat, but the I don't love it forever. But I like that it comes, and it kind of challenges us in different ways. And I know for some people, really challenges, health problems or stuff like that. But I think for most of us, it just kind of is this a little bit of oppressive thing. But I encourage you to ride the waves of it, especially. Okay, this is my specialty: is cooling the house down at night. You have one of these machines and then you just go boop, 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 and then you totally like get out of sync with the rhythm, right? And so if you, last night didn't get cool till about midnight, but it did get cool. Most nights here, it's dry enough, it will get cool. And you can, if you have some fans, you turn those on and clean everything out. And it feels kind of clean and fresh in the morning. And then you feel it building up a bit through the day. And there's a kind of nice cycle to that. If you are inclined and have the freedom to, then go swimming in the afternoon, and then everything will be fine. So I'd like to continue this morning talking a little bit about the backward step, which I began talking about last week. And I'm feeling a little... So I'm going to explain some stuff this morning. And I don't like explaining all that much. It's just kind of boring in one way. It could just lead to a sort of understanding, which is okay, but understanding can also just be so limiting. Like when we thought we have understood something, it can sort of deaden it a bit. And so I'm always a little hesitant to go into explanation, but I happen to also be a person with a massive explaining mind. And I see that there is some helpfulness to it, as long as the explaining leads to some gateways for us. It's not just a way for us to say, oh, I've understood it, and to stop and kind of dominate the world with our explanation. But the explanation can provide some navigation equipment where we can say, oh, down this road, this kind of thing may appear. Down this road, this kind of thing may appear. Down this road, these things may appear, and helps our inquiry. Because fundamentally, the study that we do of the Buddha Dharma is a study of inquiry. It's a study of inquiry into who am I, what is the world, and how is it that I will be with and in and of the world, but also not stuck in the kind of limited way that we've conceived of the world. And so that inquiry is always the most fundamental thing, right, within Buddhist practice or engaging Buddhist teachings. The teachings aren't out there, right? And our inquiry is what makes them live through us. When we practice meditation, which in this school we refer to as Zazen, and there's some, this might be interesting to know, that there's some, what would you call that? I don't know, conflict is too strong of a word, controversy of whether we should translate the word Zazen or not. Because when we say meditation, it's very easy for us to think of meditation as being something that we do. And in a sense, it is. But we get stuck in the doing side of meditation. Hold your body upright. Breathe in and out. It's all the language we use to describe how to enter meditation or to become meditation is all active. All the verbs end up being, transitive in some way. Like you hold your spine straight, right? Subject, you're the subject, your spine's the object, hold it straight. All of those kind of ways of talking about things are a little misleading, right? So can we even do meditation? Is a kind of a interesting question. Because so much of what meditation is about is not doing, but about allowing. And that's this teaching of the backward step, why it's so important. Because when we're walking forward into a world we can see and we're navigating and say, I'm going to go that way and not that way, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to make this happen and make that happen. It's always this kind of forward motion through my planning, etc. And it's very easy for us to become insensitive to be desensitized to this deep orientations of our being, which we can't see in the same way that we see the active processes of things. So, Zazen, meditation, we're studying this very interesting place where doing, being, allowing, encountering, all are our inquiry, figuring out the texture of them, learning how our life is when we rely on different things at different times. So deep and continual inquiry. And as we do that, we could say that we're really working with the roots of consciousness itself. Consciousness is kind of a big word. And if you were a neuroscientist or something like that, you know what maybe you would be interested in trying to figure out in consciousness would be very specific. You'd have it operationally defined. But I'm going to use it as kind of a loose word without too many clear edges. It's the fact you can experience, that you are experiencing. That to be here is an experience. It requires experience for you to have the sense of being here. And that's sort of very, very obvious. But sometimes when you say things obvious slowly, it seems very mysterious. Right? So I'm just saying, let's pay attention to that. That there is a stream of something that is happening which gives us the sense that we are in a place and a time with certain sets of people, with certain qualities of air and fragrance and mood and expectation and all of those things. Right? They all come together for there to be this, this moment. And when we sit down for meditation, we say, okay, wait a minute. I'm not just going to tumble through this towards whatever goal I have, explicit or implicit, but I'm going to say, what is here? And I'm going to do my best not to leave things out. I want the full presence of being to be part of my inquiry or exploration. Now, but last week, as I was talking about this backward step, I talked a lot about intimacy, about the way in which all things are completely intertwined. And we use this word intimate in Buddhism to describe that. It has other connotations too, which I may talk a little bit about today. But it means that nothing is really separate, like the gasho that we make all the time. I was using that example. This is a mudra, which is like a spiritually potent hand gesture, right? And when we make it in the very formal Soto Zen way, is like this, you know. But I kind of like it like this. It's nice, different ways. Depends on the situation. This has a lot to do with these big sleeves. You know, it looks nice if they're out a bit. But in any case, it's not this, right? It's not just this or whatever. It's okay if it's that, you know. But if we put our mind to it and we say, oh, let's just totally put my hands together. No gap between the right and the left. Now, there's a feeling to that that's interesting. It's reverential, you know, the feeling. But the feeling is not just outward. The feeling's also inward. And it has to do with this no gap between anything. And so it's saying this is how things are. And this is established Buddhist dogma. Right? This is a doctrine of Buddhism, that we're all interbeing is the term that the great teacher Thich Nhat Hanh uses, that we're all rely on each other to be, and that this is what the Buddha woke up to. What I'd like to talk a little bit about today is it is that very place that awareness springs from. And this is what we study in Zazen through the backward step. It's not that because we are intimate, that we are able to be aware of other things. It is that the total intimacy of ourself and other things is where awareness comes from. That's the point I'm making. And we study this in meditation. That's a little weird. Why is it that that's where awareness comes from? Well, it's because it's a full system. It's not just a subject which is perceiving an object, but that there is a totally dynamic process that goes way beyond our ability to comprehend or keep track of or hold, which allows for that moment of experience to arise. And it does include things that we conventionally call a subject. I'm the person seeing Robert, right? It takes a me, a conventional me, to do that. It takes these conventional eyeballs and optic nerves and a brain. And by the way, we don't really know what the brain is. And we're not sure if it is the thing that produces thoughts or it's just an organ of processing thoughts that are not housed in the brain. I mean, these things are not clear to us, right? But we could say that even if we took the stance to say, let's just all matter, like it's gray matter, it's doing something, we can't figure it out, but we know it's doing something. Even for me to have a brain that functions the way it does, it has taken at least this entire lifetime for my brain to function the way that it does now, so that when I look out and I see Robert, I can see Robert. You follow me there? It's just like completely intertwined. So when we talk about that total intimacy, anywhere we look, we find those kinds of connections. And in finding those kind of connections, we know that that's where our awareness springs from. Our awareness springs from that total entanglement. It's not just that we're aware of something and it requires our effort to be aware of it, or it requires our capacities to be aware of it. It's a interpenetrating capacities. There's a continual mirroring. This intimacy is not a place. There's not a place of intimacy and a place of non-intimacy. There is only total intimacy. And awareness flows forth from there. In the Sutra of the Hymn to the Perfection of Wisdom, there's this line, the ever-flowing fountain of incomparable light. This is a description of the mother of the Buddhas, who is here to the Buddha's left on our altar. And we think of that as being, a great being who teaches Buddhas, who births Buddhas. But that being is right here. It is the fountain of light, which is your consciousness. It is the appearance of all beings that comes through you like completely effortlessly. It just happens. That fountain is ever flowing. And we loosely can call it consciousness. We call it experience. We'll call it the moment-to-moment reality of being. Right? And it just keeps going, for better or for worse. Right? Sometimes it doesn't feel so great. Ever-flowing fountain of incomparable light sounds pretty good. Sometimes it feels like, ever-flowing, tire tracks over my midsection or whatever, whatever it is. But there is this constant thing going. Now, the term here that we've translated as intimate, mitsu is the word in Japanese. It also means hidden. It means secret. It means, if you were a Sufi, you would call it veiled. And what it means is that the intimacy is not something that you can see as an object, right? Because as soon as you see the object, the intimacy is no longer what it is that you're caring for. You're grasping onto the object. Right? It doesn't mean the intimacy disappears, but it means now you're stuck in the opaque. You're just there in the separation. But what is so amazing to me is the good news. Like when I was a kid, what was that Good News Bible they'd have? And then we said, the good news is Jesus died for your sins. Oh, great, I'm so happy for that. But I have better good news. And that is the veiled is not a problem. That it's actually the total expression of an awakened consciousness. We make it a problem, but that veil is necessary. The hiddenness of this intimacy then shows itself as phenomena, as experience, as things, which constantly flow. That's why it's an ever-flowing fountain of incomparable light, right? Is because that's actually what all these objects are, even if it feels a little bit like sand in the gears sometimes. Okay, now that's pretty mystical. Some of you might just be thinking, I don't know what he's talking about. That's totally fine. These are the kinds of directions or teachings that they're a bit explanatory, they're a little bit out there, but if there's any part of it which resonates with you, just let that resonate with you. That's all that's necessary. There's no figuring this out. There's no muscling your way into it with your brain power or your determination or any of those things. The only determination that's really helpful here is the kind and deep determination of inquiry into a deep care of your own being. That's the only kind of determination that really works here. And sometimes you get, I'll get through this meditation, and you do, and that's fine. But let that be a lesson to you. When you go through it roughly, you can come out the other side and say, okay, how was that for it to be rough? And maybe not necessary to treat myself in that way. Now, what this all, if we talk about this fountain of light, why is it that we experience it in such different ways? This is the inquiry that we're involved in the backward step. Is an inquiry into why does this continual flow of experience, which I can't control, and when I plan out and try to make it be the way I want to, I can do that to a certain extent, but it fails me time and time again, and I feel so anxious about it. What's the possibility? Why can't I experience it as a flowing fountain of light, and I experience it as the kind of anxiousness and suffering of the human life? This is the inquiry that Buddhism is inviting us into. And it says that there's a fundamental reason for this. The fundamental reason is it has to do with how it is that we're experiencing, how it is that we see things, not just what we see, but how we see it. And here I'm using see not just as we use the metaphor of visual sight a lot in Buddhist teachings, but that's not what it's about. It's about the eye of experiencing. It's about consciousness, right? Anything I experience, any phenomena that comes to me through my sense gaze, my eye, my ears, my nose, my tongue, my body, my mind, right? The consciousness of just my mind, even without the kind of external sensory inputs. That also is experiencing all the time. It is an organ of sight, of vision, of experiencing. And the way that Buddhism traditionally describes our affliction is that we're ignorant. Sorry, but that's what Buddha said. It's not your fault. It's beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, or greed, hate, and ignorance. The Buddha said, we don't need to go try to find out why that happened. It's not like you decided one day, or it's not even that there was any kind of horrible thing that you've done. It's just quite natural, actually, to be ignorant. It's quite natural to fall into the thinking of a permanent self and a subject-object relationship and all that goes with that. It's called deluded sometimes, or I like to say deluding. It's deluding vision. It's not just deluded vision. It is a way to see things which is springs from delusion and continues to spill through as delusion. It's usually dominating. There's one part that wants to dominate another. You think about how sight, just for those of you who see well, your sight is like a tyrant. Did you notice that? It can be a tyrant. Yeah, you see something and you're like, I know what you are. I know what you are. I know what you are. We have no idea. But we're doing that moment after moment after moment. Oh, grapes, grape arbor, grapes. They're right there, grapes. I'm looking over here. I know they're still there. Grapes. They're there, grapes. Right? And that's how I experience the grape arbor, which is totally ridiculous. If you go out there and hang out with a grape arbor, you'd be there all day. It's so miraculous. There's no end to the journey of the grape arbor. It's just fantastical. And yet I'm just satisfied with grape. Sorry, I'm going to go tangential. It'll only be 15 seconds. Read Ursula Le Guin. If you have not read Ursula Le Guin before, these kids, I read these when I was a kid, and I just loved them. And a few years ago, I read again the Wizard of Earthtree. And then I said last year, I said to my wife, I said, "Oh, I'll read you a book." And then I never did. And then she said, you said you were going to read me a book." So I started reading her the Wizard of Earthtree, and she falls asleep right away. So that means that I'm just reading the same paragraphs over and over and over and over again every day. It's so fun. But oh my gosh, what a spectacular mind and writer is there. But she's always talking about this true name, right? Things don't go by their true name. They have their true name. And if you know their true name, then you have this relationship with him that's different. That's a good thing for us to think about. What's our name? What's the muscle we flex when we just go, oh, grapes? What's the true name of a grape? How could you know it? That takes real relationship, not just labeling. Yeah. But we're deluded, we delude, we do this all the time. Interesting enough, in Chinese, what do you think the characters are for this delusion? It's avidya in Sanskrit, which means like the very deeper origins are not seeing. Rather than seeing in a deluded way, it means to not see or to not know, thus ignorance or delusion. In Chinese, it means no luminosity. No luminosity, which we can think of light as being a thing. We love luminosity. I love luminosity. Do you love luminosity? Joichi was telling us he swam in the bioluminescent sea in Maine. I was thinking about it. We were meditating this morning. No, I wasn't thinking about it. Well, maybe a little bit. And I was thinking that's kind of actually how it is. Like our mind, our consciousness is just moving through everything all the time. And it's just like, it's all like that luminosity that like when you're swimming and the things appear. I mean, it can be that way. That's the flowing of the incomparable light of our own consciousness, right? But the Chinese said, oh, okay, let's come up with a characters for that, Chinese characters for that. And they said, oh, it's the absence of light, the absence of brilliance, which we can think of as a thing, but we can also say that's what vision is. Not just literal vision, although literal vision is light, right? Passing through. But all experience, we could say, is a light, which is shining through. It is luminosity. And when that light gets turned into static things with our awkward naming, which doesn't even take a word to name it, it just takes us seeing it and going, I know what it is, then there's a kind of flowing, which becomes, the kind of flowing gets treated in a different way. Sometimes in Buddhism, we call this the divided mind. Bunbetsushin is the Japanese word for it. Maybe this was originally used by the sixth ancestor. Those of you who've studied the Platform Sutra, you'll see it appear there. The main point that I want to make here is when attention is dealt with in this way, then attention transfixes things. When we pay attention to something, even casually, we're fixing it with our consciousness. And when you fix things, there's something you become very nervous about. This is automatic. As you nail things down, you automatically get a little bit anxious about change. And yet you know that you've nailed it down, that it's you that's nailed it down, and that it can't continue in that way indefinitely. And so you live right in the very roots of how it is that you're seeing. You live with a kind of constant creation of anxiousness because of the way that we regard things. Again, this is all very natural, and there's a medicine for it. Its naturalness, I think we've become a little bit too, what would be the word, seduced by the idea that natural is good, right? There's big marketing around this too, you know, all natural. These are all natural delusion. How wonderful it is, but not so much, right? So it's natural, but it's also causes pain. It causes suffering, and the medicine that Buddhism presents is the Buddha Dharma. In the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha's talking about how it is that this awakened consciousness appears in the world. He's talking about the lifespan of the awakened one. What is the life of an awakened Buddha? Because the Buddha Shakyamuni, who was born in India, lived, taught, died. And this was very confusing to the Buddha's students. Like, well, okay, you're just a man, and that's important to us. But also, there's something beyond that. There's a Buddha that's just beyond you living and dying. And so in the Lotus Sutra, he teaches, he's like, well, of course, yeah, I come and go. But When living beings see the Kalpa's end, it's like the end of a world system. Okay, like so not just this world like the Earth, but like what's the new telescope they got? Jack Johnson telescope or something? What's it called? James Webb, those new pictures, the new pictures they have from there. Yeah, like we're talking about like all those two. Okay, that's the world system. Okay, so the Kalpa's end is all that. Okay, so when living beings see the Kalpa's end with all consumed in a great blaze, my domain stays serene and calm, ever filled with human and heavenly beings, gardens and groves, pavilions and palaces, adorned with every kind of gem and jeweled trees, lush with flowers and fruit where living beings delight and play. The heavenly beings beat celestial drums, ever making pleasing music, showering white Mandarava flowers over Buddha and the great assembly. My pure land is not destroyed, yet all view it as ravaged by fire, so that fear and distress pervade everywhere. It's very religious. Well, Buddhist is a religion. But he's not talking just about something like that's out there. Like this world system comes and goes out there. But the world system is right here in our own being. This world system is right here in the infinite intimacy of our own heart. And we can experience fire and distress, anxiousness. And we can experience the pure land of these gardens in which things are seen in their luminosity. And the Buddha says these are not separate. This is a radical teaching. Right? He's not like, you got to get out of that garden, it's on fire. You got to get into this garden. He's like, same garden, right? The way in which you regard things makes all the difference. So if the way we see is this issue, and deluding thoughts, deluding ways of regarding things are one side. This is very dualistic, always the trap of explanation, but also important. Then there's a liberating way, there's a wise way, there's a compassionate way to see things. And this is the medicine which the Buddha is bringing to us. And this is called komyo, or luminosity. So delusion is this mumyo, absence of luminosity. Komyo is like the flowing of light. Not caught in sense objects as things out there. It's a challenging teaching. We have a lot of those teachings in Buddhism, to not regard the objects of our experience as real. In the very famous lines of the Diamond Sutra at the end, the Buddha tells us that we should regard all things as a lamp, a cataract, a shooting star, an illusion, a dewdrop, a bubble, a dream, a cloud, a flash of lightning. View all conditioned things like this. Conditioned things means anything you can experience. Regard it as a lamp, a cataract, a shooting star, an illusion, a dewdrop, a bubble, a dream, a cloud, a flash of lightning. Doesn't that sound so nihilistic? Like that's how you're supposed to regard everything that you experience? But that's not what the Buddha's saying. He's not saying you should disregard it. He's saying you should regard it as something which is brilliant, and all things that are brilliant cannot be captured by the names that your consciousness is trying to capture it in. Right? That it is momentary because it is free. And if you can mirror the freedom of that thing that you encounter, then you're free as well. You're oriented by it. That's why those of you that were around at the end of last year, I wrote this character on this card and sent it to everyone. This character means dream. It's a positive thing for things to be a dream. They are alive in a way which our waking, very active, doing mind takes out of things. So, for the heart to receive itself as the things of the world, that our experiences, that the beings, the things whatever it is. Really, we refer to all of these as beings. Cups, grapes, ants, clumps of hair, whatever. They're all beings. But then that gets confusing because people expect them to be self-animated. And they are actually, but they don't appear that way to us very easily. So we call them things. That they're all beyond themselves. That when you see something, what you see, when you give it a name, you experience it as the known. There is something that is completely alive and beyond that knowingness that you have. And that's a mantra you can just tell yourself. It's beyond. It's beyond what I can see it to be. You can engender that way of seeing things in yourself. That's what's called the backward step. When you realize, I'm walking that way. I'm not walking this way. I'm not walking into what I know. I'm walking into what I don't know. And there's still all these things here. And everything I see is telling me about some place that I've been. It's telling me about experience, but it's not holding, the world is not just appearing on this side. They have this clever phrase in Chinese, which means plank seeing. And which is like incomprehensible unless it's explained. What it means is like you have a plank on your, like this, right? You're holding a plank on one side and you're walking along. You can't see that whole half of the world, right? You only see half of it. It's divided. The mind's divided all the time. So I loved it when I first heard that. And then I realized I actually do have a plank. I'm holding it this way, right? Like this is only 1/4. It's not 1/2. So you don't even need to put the plank on. It's all back there. You don't get to see it. Well, the very fundamentals of your consciousness are the same way. When you turn attention to something just in your mind's eye, there's all the things you can't see, which is not a problem. It's actually why all the things you do see are totally alive. They're not confined to the dominating arena of your sight. With this kind of attention, right, then things are vivified. That's lots of V's. But also like vigor, vivacious, vivid, vivifying. That type of seeing, things have spiritual fire. They're not just grapes, right? They're not just a clump of dirt. There's vaulted mansions in that clump of dirt, as the great poet William Stafford would say. There's a spaciousness beyond our appropriation that's there. And that vivifying is because we're allowing things to be free. We're allowing them to be themselves, not dominated by my consciousness. And freedom is a tricky thing there, because true freedom is limitation. Bodies of freedom are limited bodies. They are veils of something which is intimate and beyond. And so we usually think of freedom as being like, I don't want anything to hold me back, right? But that's the mind that wants to dominate, the mind that wants to dominate everything. And then if there's any barrier in your way, you say, oh, I'm not free because there's a barrier. In this way of seeing things is opposite. It says, actually, I have to cop to my limitation. When I can be limited, then I can freely relate. I'm not free to dominate the world. I'm free to relate with the world. And to the extent that I know my own limitation, I have the capacity to relate. And deep, important relationship will teach me about my limitation. So challenging and so freeing. So this kind of awareness, again, okay, I know I'm going big, broad circles, but to bring it back to Zazen, bring it back to the backward step, this is what we're studying. It's right at the very roots of our consciousness, how it is that we turn to grab, to dominate, or we step back and we allow the vibrancy of the thing to be present. That quality of attention we can practice directly, aside from all of my blabbering this morning. Right? That is not, You don't need to understand all that explanation to be able to do that, but that might provide some help for you in a place where there's something resonant. You could say, oh, let me try it this way, let me try it that way. Notice this backward step. The word is step. It's not backward journey. It's not backward what are those things called? Those race cars that they, those drag race cars, you know. It's not like, whoa, I'm there. I'm far away just from my backward step. It's only a step. Right? That's what we're paying attention to. We're not telling us a story about anything. We're not any story about how this is going to solve all problems, any story about how this is going to save the world, any stories about anything. It is simply a step. That's it. That's your limitation, is in this moment, that's all you get. And the step could be any step. You're free to relate in the way that you will relate. The intimacy is immediate. And in our stepping, which we will do regardless, there is an immediate intimacy. And that's why it's important for us to learn what this deep regard, this deep mirroring is about. When we practice this, practice of wisdom, practice of compassion, a vision of intimacy, we learn something that is a little bit surprising, I think, sometimes. And that is that none of it is impersonal. We have a way of thinking about this kind of the total interpenetration of things. We create a kind of idea of it in our head, and we think, oh, the whole world is this causes and conditions, this big soup of causes, and I'm just a little leaf floating in there, and so I don't really matter. Actually, if I could just get out of the way, then the whole universe would be free to not have me there. It's very easy to fall into that kind of interpretation of those teachings, but that's not actually how it is. The window through which this whole universe appears is you, your consciousness. And so you getting out of the way, you disappearing, that kind of nihilistic fantasy of spiritual liberation being kind of your own death, that's not what it's about. It's totally personal. Your own personal momentary experience is richly valuable. And the reason I bring that up is because I think we forget that too easily, and we get frozen. We don't know what to do. We say, okay, I could try to practice that. I could try to regard things in this deeper way, pay attention to them without capturing them, letting them be free. But then what do I do? That's what I'm talking about next week. So we have time for a couple questions, but don't ask me about doing, because I'll talk about that next week. Hi.
Could you speak a little more just about the limiting quality of this way of seeing? Or...
Yeah. I think I'm capable of speaking a little bit. It's one of my limitations. So this is kind of, because it's so kind of counterintuitive to us, it's one of these things that, you know, through practice can flip as you keep paying attention to it. But our normal way of thinking about freedom is really quite dominating. Like, we want there to be a clear space in which I don't have to relate to anything in a way that's challenging to my ability to do what it is that I want to do. We see this playing out in our society all over the place right now, right? People are like, well, I should be free to say what I want. And then people say, well, yeah, you're free to say what you want, and I'm free to say what I want. And I'm going to say it back to you if you say the thing you said, right? That's freedom, right? That's relational. But what people think when they're saying freedom is I should have the right to say whatever I want, and no one will say anything back to me, right? That's not freedom. That's like the divine right of kings. And so it's opposite, really. So for us in our practice to recognize that that's really in us. That's not just in the people you disagree with, by the way. A nice thing to note. It's in you too, equally, really. And so when we realize that, then to say, what is the deep relation that allows for there to be something else happening, for there to be a freedom which is not about the domination, but a freedom to deeply mirror and to relate. And that kind of freedom is so nourishing. And once we taste it, which we do, I'm sure you do, then put your awareness there and let it be a medicine to the other kind of awareness where we just feel like bogged down by things. Now, the other kind of awareness is important, like we have a kind of ridiculous society right now where, we're working all the time and we don't have any boundaries around when we do this or that or whatever. And part of that's because of COVID and part of it because we're just kind of losing it as a society. So I'm not saying that other kind of sense of unfreedom is not important to pay attention to. We need to. Or when we're being dominated by another being and we need to be really clear, like boundary, right? And then sometimes we can't keep the boundary because we don't have enough strength or we're not cared for enough in the larger society. So that's all really important. But this part I'm talking about is when we recognize our limitation, then we can relate. But we need that boundary of our being to be able to relate. Hi.
Not quite a question, but I just want to share an experience as it relates to this. So I had the pleasure of going on you yesterday
Mm-hmm.
Forest Bathing retreat, and this was so apparent to me, and we shared about it openly, how with, all of your senses, how the immediate response is to label, and then how it's very clear, it was very clear to me that that limits my experience of what I'm trying to engage with and be fully present in. And so by the end of it, Anu is so great at the way she sets it up, because by the end of it, I felt like I experienced this wholehearted view, and the first word I used was intimacy, where I could begin. One, I had to accept that as a human, those are my limitations, because then that actually is counterintuitive. But the acceptance that I do that gave me freedom to go to kind of let go
Yeah.
of this desire to label. And it's hard to get out of the head, though, in those experiences with the senses, because it's so. And I remember we did the sound one, and I was like, oh, that was easy, because I knew what every sound meant and what it was going to do, and what the purpose of the sound was.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the end, to have this feeling, being able to have this intimacy through the freedom of acknowledging my limitations
Mm-hmm.
as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
It was really beautiful, and I highly recommend people participate if they can and go with on the curious experience, because and we talk about the practice stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
And do you have two more?
I was going to do it tonight,
Mhm.
but it's a little too warm
Mhm.
at 5:30. So the one tonight is going to be postponed to next Thursday night forward. And then I'll schedule some more hours in
Okay,
September.
great,
So
yeah.
you want to stop going down writing to do it.
Great. Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, and that's so beautiful, Beck. Thank you for sharing. And one thing to throw out there for the assembly too is that this is equally possible with human manufactured things and images. Equal possibility does not mean equally easy. That we're so magnetized by what is human created that to purposely take the time to step beyond human created images, which you are inundated with in an unparalleled way. You see more images in a day than people from 100 years ago saw in a lifetime, right? So that we don't know what that's doing to our consciousness exactly, but I can tell you it's doing something that we're going to have to figure out. I'm not saying it's bad, although it has some bad aspects to it. So getting away from that and from a human created world, from buildings, from cars, as much as possible to a place where there is this world that appears up from the earth beyond us. That has a way of calling us beyond in a really magical way. So wonderful, great.
One thing I was wondering, and it was something you mentioned where you said you study in meditation, like you were talking about the
Yeah.
way you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's something I come across in like many books that
Mm-hmm.
I've been reading as well. And it's hard for me to like sort of combine the ideas of like focusing on these concepts during meditation,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems like focus is something that we're almost trying to like go away from
Yeah.
to be able to be
Yeah.
aware.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm completely
Yeah.
confused.
Thank you. This is a perfect question, and you're helping me and everyone, because that was the conundrum I opened with, like why I don't like to explain things, because it seems like then the invitation to meditation is, okay, I should sit and think about the explanation, and so if there's any part that kind of resonates with you, feel for that. But in meditation, to study it, we don't want to study the concept, we want to study the intimacy. And so when we talk about what's it like when our mind is hardening around things, we can feel that. So when we're sitting and it's just happening, anybody, you do it right away and you'll see like, oh, I can hear Edjo right now, but when the kids were closer to the thing and they were, and I couldn't hear what he was saying, right? And so you have that. Everyone has it. You'll all have a different feeling about kids' voices depending on who you are and how good your hearing is and a whole bunch of things. But you'll have those thoughts. So what you're doing in meditation is not saying, oh, I wonder which ones are ignorant and I wonder which ones are this, and I'll try to sort it out or I'll try to label them and see how they fit together. You want to experience very directly what's the hardening that happens when I regard things in a kind of closed way. And what's the quality of things when I regard them with this what? Like the question what? The stepping back, the allowing, the accepting. And then we study those two. So what we want to study in meditation is the backward step itself, where we say, okay, there's all this experiences I have, but I know that's not all there is. I can't just hold it together. And my body's a perfect reflection of that. I'm here, I'm sitting. I thought I knew what my body was. And then all of a sudden I'm feeling this part of my body I didn't even know I had. Or I knew I had because I saw a drawing of myself or I saw myself in the mirror, but I don't go around thinking about it. And now that's included in your experience. And you allow your attention to be present with it and you study. And just by allowing it, there will be a shift that happens. And that's where a path starts to open up, because being aware of it, a medicine is present, kind of beyond our doing.